From translation, Net New English Translation, this 151 day of the year, today we are reading passages Esther 6-10, Esther chapter 6, verses 1 to 14. That very night the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book containing the historical records of his kingdom to be brought, and while it was being read before him, he came across the record which said, Mordecai uncovered a plot of 2 of the king's guards, Bigthana and Teresh, who were doorkeepers. They plotted to assassinate King Ahasuerus. The king asked, what honor or reward was given to Mordecai for this? The attendants replied, nothing has been given to him for this. The king asked, who is in the courtyard? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak with the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. The attendants replied to the king, Haman is standing in the courtyard. The king said, let him enter. So Haman entered, and the king said to him, what should be done for the man the king wishes to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, to whom would the king wish to show more honor than me? So Haman said to the king, for the man the king wishes to honor, let royal clothing be brought which the king himself has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Let the clothing and horse be handed over to one of the king's most distinguished officials. Let him clothe the man the king wishes to honor, lead him on the horse through the city square, and proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man the king wishes to honor. The king said to Haman, go ahead. Do just that for Mordecai the Jew, don't leave out anything you have suggested. So Haman took the clothing and the horse, and he clothed Mordecai and led him through the city square, proclaiming as he went, this is what is done for the man the king wishes to honor. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home, mourning, with his head covered in grief. Haman explained everything to his wife Zeresh and all his friends. His wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of Jewish ethnicity, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and rushed Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. Esther chapter 7, verses 1 to 10. The king and Haman came to dine with Esther the queen. On the second day of the banquet, when the king had drunk some wine, he said to Esther, what is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. The queen replied, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me as my request, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had simply been sold as male and female slaves, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not have been worth disturbing the king. King Ahasuerus replied to Queen Esther, who is he? Where is the one who dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman panicked in the presence of the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage and went out into the palace garden. But Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he realized the king had already determined his doom. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was there, falling on the couch where Esther was lying. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the king said this, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who were with the king, said, indeed, the gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai, who delivered the king, stands at Haman's house, 75 feet high. The king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Esther chapter 8, verses 1 to 17. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had revealed his relationship to her. The king removed his signet ring which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's estate. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and begged him to avert the evil of Haman the Agagite and his plot that he had plotted against the Jews. The king extended the gold scepter to Esther. So she arose and stood before the king. She said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and if the matter seems appropriate to the king and I am pleasing to him, let it be written to revoke the documents of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are throughout all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster that will come to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my relatives? King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, look, I have given Haman's estate to Esther, and he was hanged on the gallows because he plotted to harm the Jews. You may write in the king's name as you see fit concerning the Jews, and seal it with the king's signet ring. A document written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's signet ring, cannot be revoked. So the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. Everything was written exactly as Mordecai ordered for the Jews, and to the king's satraps and governors and officials of all the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to each province in its own script and to each people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and their own language. He wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. He sent letters by couriers on horseback, who rode fast and pressed hard by the king's command. The king's edict gave the Jews in every city the right to assemble and to defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any ethnic or provincial army that might attack them, including their women and children, and to plunder their goods on a single day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the edict was to be issued as a decree in every province and published to all peoples, so that the Jews would be ready to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers rode out in haste on the royal horses, pressed hard by the king's command. The edict was also issued in the fortress of Susa. Mordecai went out from the king's presence in royal blue and white, with a great golden crown and a purple linen robe. The city of Susa rejoiced and celebrated. For the Jews there was light, joy, gladness, and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the king's edict and his law arrived, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. Many of the people of the land declared themselves to be Jews, because the fear of the Jews had fallen on them. Esther chapter 9, verses 1 to 32. In the 12th month, the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to gain power over them, the opposite happened. The Jews gained power over their enemies. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to attack those who wanted to harm them. No one could stand against them, because the dread of them had fallen on all the peoples. All the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the royal administrators helped the Jews, because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was now second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was honored by all his fellow officials and by the king's people, because he was continually working for the good of his people and speaking for the welfare of all his relatives. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did what they wanted to those who hated them. In the fortress of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshandasa, Dalpon, Espasa, Porasa, Adalia, Aridasa, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vasasa, the 10 sons of Haman son of Hamidasa, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not confiscate their property. On that day, the number of those killed in the fortress of Susa was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, "In the fortress of Susa the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the provinces of the king? What is your request? It will be given to you. What more do you want? It will be fulfilled." Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be permitted to do again tomorrow as they did today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded that this be done. The law was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. The Jews in Susa gathered on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Susa. But they did not confiscate their property. The rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to protect themselves and rest from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not confiscate their property. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and celebration. The Jews in Susa, however, gathered on the 13th and 14th days of the month of Adar and rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and celebration. This is why rural Jews who live in villages observe the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of feasting and celebration and a holiday. They send gifts to one another. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. He instructed them to observe the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same month, each year as the time when they gained rest from their enemies, and the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a holiday. These were to be days of feasting and celebration, sending gifts to one another and to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue what they had begun to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman son of Hamidasa, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he by written letters thwarted the plot of Haman, who had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and his sons he hanged on the gallows. Therefore these days were called Purim, after the pur. Because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had experienced and what had happened to them, the Jews bound themselves and their descendants, and all who joined with them to observe these 2 days as required, according to their written instructions and according to the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, in every province, and in every city. These days of Purim should never cease among the Jews, nor should their memory ever disappear among their descendants. Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, words of peace and truth to confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established, and as they had committed themselves and their descendants to observe these days of Purim, according to their written instructions and their regulations for each generation. The command of Esther established these customs of Purim, and it was written in the book. Esther chapter 10, verses 1-3. King Ahasuerus imposed tribute throughout the land, even to its distant shores. All his powerful and mighty deeds are recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia, which the king's officials have compiled. Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews and well received by the multitude of his brothers, for he worked for the good of his people and spoke for the welfare of all his relatives.